It's like the whole nature of the home cook thing is like, oh, I should be able to eat food from my neighbor. Well, no one's saying that you can't eat food from your neighbor. Like you can eat food from your neighbor. When you commercialize it,
Yeah.
then you're kind of entering into a different relationship. And that's a more, if you're saying that's a business, then there does need to be some sort of consumer protections for the
Sure.
consumer.
Hey, everybody, this is Mike, and welcome to the Spoon Podcast. Today's guest is Ashley Colpaart, the CEO of the Food Corridor, a company that provides software and tools for shared kitchens, as well as providing a nationwide directory and lead generation site for shared kitchens as well. And so I've known Ashley for a while. She's come to my event and spoken at the Smart Kitchen Summit. She has her own SKS, the Shared Kitchen Summit. And I recently caught up with her in San Diego at the Fancy Food Show. And I wanted to invite her on in part because of that, but also she had a really great essay on her site about the evolution of home cooking marketplaces. And so we talk about that. So I think you find it interesting. Ashley has great, deep knowledge on the space. I really enjoyed it. I hope you do as well. As always, stay tuned for more podcasts from The Spoon, as well as others on the Spoon Podcast Network. And we'll be back next week. Ashley, I feel like we've known each other for almost a decade because you've come to my SKS, Smart Kitchen Summit. You also have your SKS, which is Shared Kitchen Summit.
You're like, don't use my hashtag. I'm like, okay, we'll use a different one.
I feel bad now. Go ahead and use it. I feel like I'm
I think it actually helps both of us. You should probably attend both events.
Yes, I need to come to your event. And the reason I wanted to chat is I saw you at Fancy Food Show in San Diego just about, was it a couple weeks ago? It seems like a month ago now.
I know.
And it's always great to see you. But after that, you wrote a great article on the future of food. So I want to talk about that.
Sure.
It was good to see you though.
Yeah, you too. I was going to say, it has been like a really long time. I started Food Corridor 11 years ago. And I remember I spoke at your event on the future of food and kind of access to infrastructure, which is, essentially what the Food Corridor does is connect food entrepreneurs with commercial kitchen space. And so I kept those slides, and there's a recording of me like so early on when I was young and spunky and didn't know what I was getting myself into.
We're so much younger and spunkier and less gray hair, at least for me. But do you look back at some of that stuff and just cringe? Like, what was I saying?
I actually think it's interesting. I looked back at that specific, talk that I did, and it's very similar to the talks that I still give. I remember preparing for that talk, and I brought in my personal story into that talk around how my mom was a food entrepreneur growing up and how she used to make hot sauce in my home kitchen, and how my dad was a tech entrepreneur in the Bay Area. And kind of merged my own story. And that was the first time I merged my own story into a session. But I still tell that story as kind of my Genesis story. And so I keep that one as kind of a memory of when I owned myself in all what I was doing. So it was pretty
workshopping. You were workshopping your TED Talk, if you will.
I was.
Your Netflix special. And I'm glad that you kept a part of it that originated at my event.
At the Spoon.
That origin story, before we jump into your last couple of pieces, tell people a little bit about yourself, because you have this PhD, you're a company founder, Shared Kitchens is your passion. When you tell people your origin story in like a minute or so introduction at a dinner, what do you tell them?
Yeah, so I have my background's in food. My mom was a food entrepreneur growing up. My dad was a Silicon Valley engineer who immigrated here during the computer boom. So I grew up going to farmers markets. I've always been really into food, and I got a degree in nutrition. I got a degree in food policy, and then I got a PhD in food systems. And my biggest passion has always been, how can we create more regional and local food systems? And so I focused on food system infrastructure, and it was around the time that the sharing economy was coming on, and I was looking for ways of applying the sharing economy to the food system. And I created the Food Corridor, which is essentially Airbnb for commercial kitchens, where we link up food entrepreneurs with access to infrastructure so they can grow and scale food products. So it's a food system play and a marketplace, and we have 650 kitchens on our platform that use our software, and then thousands of others that are just posting listings on our kitchen door site and connecting with food entrepreneurs that are ready to take that next leap.
What was a early moment, if you can remember back, being at those food or street fairs with your mom? Was there Was there something that really triggered or sparked this interest in food that you knew you'd want to go into this space?
I think I always appreciated like the other kids. So I was there as a kid, child labor, selling food,
Yeah.
hey, watch the booth. We're headed over here. And I'm taking the money and doing that, trying to get people to stop. But there were other kids there helping their families, and just like family owned businesses and grit that it takes. I think that was a big part of it. I also remember like my mom started this hot sauce company in Austin, Texas during kind of a revolutionary time in food systems. It was right when Whole Foods was becoming more popular.
Sure.
And it was before there was like 100 SKUs of hot sauce on the shelves. So she had one of the first habanero sauces to enter the market, and amazing branding. But we lived out pretty far from town and there wasn't a commercial kitchen near our house. So my parents used to just make it, it was a cottage foods business, and they would sanitize the bottles in our home dishwasher, and we used to have to wear swim goggles on our face because the peppers were so hot and we'd have to protect our eyes, otherwise you'd be crying. But I remember like the sauce, we won hot sauce, the hot sauce company, not company, the hot sauce competitions in Austin, and just really were getting a lot of traction. But my mom was doing it as a side hustle. And she would have to have either built her own commercial kitchen out where we lived or quit her jobs to drive down into, central Austin to access commercial kitchens to actually make a go at this. And it ended up just being too big of a leap. She couldn't access the infrastructure she needed to scale up the production. And so to me, that was always what resonated with me. It was like, man, that was like our $1 million idea as a family-owned business, and we couldn't get it to the next stage because of this infrastructure play. So that always, sat in the back of my mind.
I can certainly see how this informs so much of like where you went with trying to build out ways in which people can have access to shared kitchens. And you also are a product of it sounds like your parents, in that you fuse this love of food and small food businesses with your dad's Silicon Valley origins, because you basically created a mix of the two things in a sense.
Yeah. And it's so strange to look back and to look at it that way. But yeah, my dad, he immigrated here from the Netherlands, and he was an engineer in the Bay Area, part of some of the first, startups that created the microprocessor chips for the home computer. So he was like literally part of those, in the garage conversations that were happening during that revolutionary time. So I always had a passion for technology and the role that it can play and the future that it could bring us. But I also wanted to merge that with food. So I'm pretty blessed that I'm like, been able to tailor that to my life.
When I first started looking at your business and writing about it, it was at a time, I think, when I was really discovering what this whole shared and commissary kitchen business looked like. It was also at a time that Silicon Valley was dabbling. And do you remember Pilot Works? I think they were based out of, Rhode Island, or they were certainly based out of the East Coast. And it was like a venture funded startup that was basically trying to do shared kitchens and truly like that Airbnb for Uber for kitchens, but they actually provided the kitchens themselves. But they flamed out pretty quickly.
The pilot light flamed out.
Yeah, exactly.
Good one, Michael. They were one of the first, kitchens to take it through a VC lens. And I think that ultimately is what ended up having the lights go out, because the scalability at that point of the model wasn't quite figured out. And they were forced to grow at a rate that was probably unrealistic for what they were trying to achieve. But they did set a lot of the original frameworks, as well as thought process behind like what these kitchens could be. And there's a lot of kitchens that look a lot like Pilot Works now that have figured out the back of the house ERP management, who are starting to scale. And that's really interesting because Food Corridor, our platform, our software, we're software as a service for the owners and operators of the kitchen. So we provide the tech to the back of the house. So the scheduling and booking, the compliance, document management, the billing, the onboarding, basically all the daily tasks that an operator would do, we manage through the software. And so we've seen in the last 3 to 5 years, more kitchens that have been on our software for a long time open second, third, fourth locations because they have figured out that back of the house ERP, which I think Pilotworks may have gotten there at some point, but they were doing a pretty strong real estate play, owning property, and I think that's expensive, and so it was a new concept, but I don't think it was a concept. It may not have worked out for them. Maybe they didn't have the right players or funders or whatever it was, but the concept itself is still alive today.
The digital transformation and the software SaaS piece makes so much sense, and that's where you ultimately went. It was the misalignment around bringing in real estate, much like I felt like we saw WeWork largely flame out to a certain extent. Real estate is not a venture fundable, in many ways, not as venture fundable as SaaS.
Right, but co-working still exists.
Yeah.
Like the
For
concept
sure. Yeah,
of
like you're right.
co-working.
Like the idea is good. It's just like you have
the scale's wrong.
And a misalignment of priorities because you have to make venture capitalists happy, and that doesn't necessarily work in these businesses.
It doesn't work early, or it could work early on, but it didn't. So,
or carving out a piece like you did and say, hey, let's build like a platform for software, and not necessarily let's scoop up a bunch of real estate in Manhattan or Rhode Island or whatever.
Right. I think what we did that was a little different is that we went to the existing operators and asked them what their pain points were. And in interviewing, and this was part of my dissertation research, I surveyed, 140 of these kitchens across the US and Canada and chatted with them and said, what keeps you up at night? Like, what do you spend all your time doing? And there was such a similarity across all of them that I was like, that's where software can make a big influence. And if we can make it work for the existing operators, then we could open the market to more people and say, hey, this business model works. Here's the framework, here's the software, and here's the best practices across the industry. Now you can go and open one yourself. And so we're starting to see that happen where, where there wasn't a commercial kitchen before, like in where I grew up out in Lake Travis in Austin, now maybe there is because the business model can work out there now.
When you were going and doing your dissertation on shared kitchens, you may have been like one of the first ever to do, obviously, such a very narrowed focus on shared kitchens. But did you think that your ultimate career path would be to start a company? Or were you thinking you'd be a professor somewhere or writing white papers about shared kitchen economics in ecosystems?
That's a really good question. So I worked in like nonprofit work for a while, and after getting burned in that area, I was like, I'll never work for a nonprofit again. Like I want to be able to control my own destiny and not be at the the beckonness of some other external thing happening. And then in academia, I just kept going in academia because I was obsessed with food systems and I just wanted to learn as much as I possibly could. But it wasn't until, and I did think I was going to go into academia. I did think I got publications and journals and teaching. Like I taught at Texas State for a year. I taught undergrad food systems and nutrition, and I love teaching and I love academia. But I always felt like it maybe wasn't right for me. It's just too much too boring,
too
institutionalized.
Yeah.
Where I tend to like to break rules and create my own path. But it wasn't until I started doing the research and seeing the response to the survey questions that I was asking that I realized there was a there. And I think with business, like the best businesses are ones that solve real world problems. So I don't know if you remember this, but at your summit, when I spoke, part of what I presented on was that company Juicero. Do you remember Juicero?
Yeah. I feel like everyone has used Juicero, a Juicero reference in the food tech conversation.
Well, Juicero is the perfect example of a problem in search of a solution, or a solution in search of a problem, right? Where they're like, no one has this problem of needing to squeeze juice. Like, it's like not even a thing. But they came up with, and they're like, oh, you'll have to buy these packages. And it's just a great, it's a great business. And it's like, it's not a great business because nobody has that real world problem.
Yeah.
But in doing my research, I realized how this really is a real world problem, and one that fits squarely into the things that I care the most about, because I care about local and regional food systems. And I also care deeply about it being a market-based solution, not propped up by subsidies, not propped up by nonprofit. Like I want it to work in a real world economy. And that's I think a lot of also what's formed why I have a or a private business instead of working for academia or nonprofits.
Well, I think one thing that I see the academic shining through is your pieces that you write on your blogs. I feel like you still have this itch you want to scratch with thought leadership and the academic side of you. And the most recent piece that you wrote two. One is about these shared kitchens, or the MEHKO framework. We'll get to that. But you wrote one before that on the future of food, and you pointed to a couple demographic shifts that I think are interesting: smaller households over time, aging populations, and more cultural diversity. And you talk about how this is really shaping our food system today. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So the idea for this article came from listening to a podcast, a really long podcast, on the way home from the fancy fair show. In that podcast, they talk about the founder of Trader Joe's being a really forward-thinking founder who is looking at demographic trends and really catering his business model to the trends that are coming along. And so I started doing a little research on like what are the demographic trends in the US right now, because that is sure to shape food systems in the next 3, 5, 10 years. And so in looking at the trends, I realized, the one thing we've all been realizing is that families are getting smaller. The people are having less children. People are having no children. Some grandparents, might, have smaller, be living alone. Lots of people still are choosing to live alone or not have families at all. And so just the family sizes are smaller. Obviously with immigration, there's tons of, different variety of immigrants that have come to the country that are bringing their flavors and their traditions and their cultures to our food system. And then the other one is just how people buy food, right? Or like where they find community and where they find foods. So I was looking at like those demographic trends and just kind of thinking through like what our food system how our food system is going to adjust based on those trends.
And I think you argued in your piece that the future food isn't bigger, more scaled, it's smaller and more human. What did you mean by that? If I got that right, what did you mean by that?
Yeah, you did. So, and this is another thing I kind of carried into my feedback from the Fancy Fair show, or what I've noticed there is like, I felt like and I'm a unique consumer because I have so much, there's so much at stake in food systems to me, and I look at it through a very distinct lens. And maybe you look at it through the same lens, but the companies that were most compelling to me at the Fancy Fair show were the ones that had like a really interesting story, either family owned and operated, or had a really vertical supply chain that they were, growing their own grains, or they were raising their own cattle in Texas, or they were, somehow like connected to their supply chain in a really like dynamic and interesting way, or having a story that's really close to like their home or where they came from. And those to me were like the most compelling emerging brands. And I feel like with the way food is being sold and needs to be sold is that people have to have a connection to it, or make them feel a certain way. Like shelf space is one thing, just like seeing a brand on a shelf, but like how people are interacting with brands outside of the food space has changed so much. And I think it's starting to show up in food.
That's so interesting. In Japan, where I go every year, they took me to the west side of Japan, to this little town called Ureshino. And there's a farmer there that had this regenerative farm where he'd grow rice. And on that rice farm, he would use fertilizer from his cows he had. And then also he would feed that rice to the cows, and then you'd get the milk from the cows. And he had a milk bar. He actually had a bar where he would serve at retail. He had a little stand where he'd serve these coffees and these milks using the same milk. But it was clearly circular, and I just thought it was so interesting. It's kind of that alignment that you're talking about. I don't know if I see that as much in the U.S., and I don't see it all the time in Japan, but it was kind of a perfect example you're talking about.
So one thing I wanted to mention is one of the booths that I saw that was so interesting to me at Fancy Fair. I don't know if you saw. Did you see the Whatnot booth?
No.
They were like way back in the corner. But the reason I bring it up is in Asia, one of the ways people are selling products right now is through like live commerce. Have you seen this trend where people are like live selling products? They're
Via,
like,
via in-person TV, in physical retail. How so?
yeah. So through live streaming.
Okay.
So they're either doing, you know, they're like trying things on and showing
Okay.
products
Yeah.
and like,
Okay.
it's kind of like
Yeah.
a home shopping network sort of thing, but it's through live streaming. These are so popular, this live streaming.
So influencers who are trying stuff on, and then they have an arrangement with the brand. Is that what you're largely
Yeah.
referring to? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So there was this company that was in the back corner. I met Francisco, one of the founders of Whatnot, and he had a setup of live selling in the arena there. And they had a couple, like a jerky company was there, like live selling their jerky and telling their story and doing these auction based sales. And I just thought it was so interesting because a lot of what you see, I think, at these shows is like there's been not so much disruption to how food is sold in CPG, and the margins are so tight, and it's just such a hard industry. I actually really feel, and I wrote this in my article, I really feel for the founders that try to do this. CPG, I feel like, is, of all the food businesses people could start, is probably one of the more challenging ones. Like, you're literally putting your house on the line when you go into CPG. Do you agree?
Yeah, and I think it's getting harder because the costs are going up and there's more competition, and a direct to consumer, which I think really had a coming out party like a decade ago, I think is becoming more challenging. Great. I'm glad there's platforms like Shopify and stuff like that, but I think it's getting harder for these companies because it's so crowded.
Yeah, I agree. So what I thought was interesting with this Whatnot platform is the ability to do storytelling and to really own the story and humanize products. So I really thought that, if this were to become a bigger way for a different avenue for CPG founders to tell their story and find distribution, that there's something really interesting there that I feel like could lead to some interesting disruption. So I think you should bring Francisco onto your podcast and chat with him about it, because he was there for a reason. And he also said that food was his fastest growing new category, because traditionally they're like an auction site. They're auctioning like collector's items, like tennis shoes apparently are really popular.
I love that he went to fancy. I think it's great that he showed up at fancy food. That's
I
so
totally
cool.
agree. I was like, he's back in the corner. I was like, what is this thing? This is so interesting. So I was like, I want to partner with him.
And this is maybe a bridge to your second essay, but in your first essay about future food, you talked about how traditional restaurant paths are becoming harder, and you're seeing less food entrepreneurs do that because obviously we're seeing everywhere. Maybe it's like this in Austin, but in Seattle, we're seeing Michelin star chefs, like the best chefs, closing the restaurants because they just can't make it work. The economics of it aren't working. And so are you seeing the same thing across these bigger urban areas and maybe smaller areas? And is that why you wrote that?
Yeah, I think we're seeing it in a lot of the big cities, and definitely see it here in Austin. And then you see platforms like Cook Unity that are really trying to elevate these chefs into a new way, a new market, a new channel, to keep their brand and to keep their notoriety through a different way, which I think is very interesting. I think they're going about it in an interesting way, and they have so many unique partnerships that they're just like really trying things out. But I do think, that restaurants themselves are having a renaissance and having to rethink how they operate. That said, like, I feel like I might be old school, but especially after COVID, I was ready to go back to restaurants and have the experimental experience of sitting down at a restaurant and having the hospitality and having the service. But I feel like with the move of so many restaurants to be fast casual, that it kind of like took away from that. Like that to me, like the experiential service and the experience side of is why I go out to eat. Fast casual kind of took that away. It just like diluted it. It's like, okay, so now I get this bowl of something, picked up or delivered, and I'm eating it with a
Yeah.
plastic fork, and it's like not a great
Not
experience.
everyone can be sweet greens. I mean, there's the sweet greens, and then like we don't all have to try and be that. But has restaurants always been hard? I feel like, or am I making too big a deal about how food costs are going up? Because it seems like it's always been a high failure rate, or is it just getting worse?
Yeah, I don't know if I know exactly. I think it's there's lots of changes that are happening. It has seemed to me that mom and pop restaurants have always been the way that lots of people can make a go at it. Like most communities have had or have a mom and pop restaurant that's local, and that's a fabric of the community, and it's when the scaled versions come in and can afford the property taxes or whatever, and they push them out, and the costs get higher. Food costs, certainly. I mean,
Yeah.
anyone that
Yeah.
grocery shops knows, like,
And
just-
real estate,
just-
everything's going up.
yeah, despite what they say, oh, everything's better. It's like, is it really? Like, let's actually,
Are
let's
you sure about that?
let's release those reports and really see, like, 'cause everybody feels it. I mean, costs are going up for sure.
You had a great article also that you wrote about MEHKO. I love the academic and deep lens you put on this topic, because this is an area you've been following for a long time. You have a passion for home cooks. There's been so much change with regards to home-based businesses, cottage food, and now the MEHKO framework. Can you talk about this piece you just wrote?
Yeah, to your point, I've been following this for a really long time, and I wrote an update 2 years ago and wanted to do a new update because now LA County is one of the biggest county to actually start implementing these at the local level. So I was really interested to see like what's happening on the ground with all of this. One of the interesting things that I found is, so California liberalized home cook, being able to sell food direct to consumers at the local level, at the home cook level. With some rules, but they also, I think we're trying to protect the state or the makers from certain companies coming in and being able to have these home cooks sell through existing channel platforms, specifically through delivery. So I think they were trying to prevent, and I could be reading into this, but this is what I was seeing. I think they were trying to prevent an onslaught of unregulatable home cooks moving so quickly that they couldn't keep up with it, which is what happened with Uber. So we saw this Uberfication where consumers caught on so fast that they couldn't put it back in the bottle, right? The genie couldn't go back in the bottle. So what they did in California is, in addition to liberalizing these laws for home cooks, they required that if a home cook wanted to sell direct to consumer, they had to do it through an internet food service intermediary, and that those had to be registered with the state. And I just thought that was really interesting. And they're not allowed to do delivery. That's also part of the things, but they're basically asking these IFSIs to do part of the work for them, to make sure the home cooks have their license and have done their food safety. And so they're putting them in as a layer within the implementation.
So a couple things. They didn't necessarily want these home cooks flooding these Uber Eats and other marketplaces that people are used to getting restaurant created food. And secondly, it sounds like maybe this is an evolution of what we, when I first started covering this, I was writing about a company called Josephine that went out of business. They were kind of a pioneer in the space. And the remnants of that led to the Cook Alliance, I think, which you write about all this in your most recent piece.
Yeah.
And the Cook Alliance created some of these frameworks. And was this the origin of these internet food service providers?
Yeah. The reason the laws passed in California was because Josephine went out of business and then turned themselves into a nonprofit with a mission to go to California and get the laws changed so that they could then arguably go back in as an internet food service intermediary and be able to build the market of home chefs that they wanted to build through their technology. So they started as a tech platform. They moved into a nonprofit. They went and changed laws. And now, not surprisingly, they are, they're on the list. Here they are. Here they are again. So, they did the heavy lifting, to their credit. But they're on the list.
They were an advocacy organization but like the original founders of Josephine are long gone. I don't think they're actually running this business, but like there are a lot of businesses that took up the mantle, right? Chef, I think, and Dish Divvy, which I think Dish Divvy went out of business, but there's a few others as well.
Yeah, Dish Divvy did go out of business. Some of the people that that are on the list. So Airbnb, Cookin, which Cookin, it has been acquired by Cook Unity. They were in Canada and then a few places in the U.S., but they're a part of Cook Unity now. Cook Unity is on the list. Food Gnome has been acquired by the company that is the platform behind Josephine, or the organization behind that
Cook
turned
Alliance
into
acquired
Cook Alliance. Yeah, they bought them. Hot Plate, which has always been a direct-to-consumer platform for home cooks and different products. Some other ones. So Chef is on there, the Dish Corp, and then a bunch of others. Like in doing my research, I checked all these. I did a records request from the health department in California, and there were 58 on the list. Of those, more than half have already gone out of business, and the only ones that you would recognize are the ones that I mentioned.
And these are trying to be essentially platforms for home cooks that want to create businesses, essentially, right? And this is, you have a lot of thoughts about that in general, like having the home kitchen as a source for food that ultimately ends up that I buy over as food that I buy over the marketplace. I don't know where to start with you because you have so many thoughts on this, but what is your initial thought on the state of this market?
Well,
right
I'll
now?
be completely transparent. I own a platform in the food space. So,
Yeah, you do. You do.
I'm not,
but for professional shared kitchens though.
Right. And so I also represent a community of owners and operators of shared kitchens that have followed health department regulations to the T so that they can open these commercial kitchen spaces. And so now we're going to a part of the population and liberalizing the laws for everybody else and saying, oh, now you can do this. And it's kind of like, wait, now they can all do this. And so, yeah, I do have a lot of thoughts about it. My argument in the piece that I wrote is kind of going back to what I said earlier, is it a solution in search of a problem? Because to me, these shared kitchens are already an access point for folks that want to sell direct to consumer. They don't have to go out and spend $300,000 to build their own commercial kitchen. They can access it like a gym membership when they need it, and grow a business through the access that they need through like a membership. And so that model exists. And so what my argument is shouldn't the health department be promoting the use of a shared kitchen where they can centrally monitor and evaluate and license folks in one central location, then opening up this, can of worms of going into people's homes and having to regulate people's homes, which, I would, my background's in food systems and food safety. And if you talk to a healthcare or like a health department person, they don't want to go into someone's home. Like it could potentially be dangerous, but also, they're already short staffed. And so it just opens up, there's a lot of things that it opens up. And that's what I tried to discuss in my article.
To counterpoint that, and I'd love to have your responses, the idea of like the cost and the burden it puts on the local health departments is significant, and they don't have, no one's hiring more food inspectors. But Paul, the guy I had a conversation with, he says the idea that he thinks would work is the surprise inspection. Okay, I can always see you're smiling. Like where you don't necessarily have to hire a bunch of new home and health inspectors, but you do have them periodically come by. So I'm just trying to find is there a balance where this can work? Because I like the idea of giving a new opportunity for people to create food in their home and sell it to make money. I do see your point that professional kitchens are probably better, but also I don't know if everyone can afford like a $300, $400, $500 a month rental where they already have equipment in their home. So I'm just trying to find if there's a balance we can kind of strike in this, in the kind of between these two spaces.
Yeah, I mean, there probably is. Maybe I'm not creative enough to see it. And I understand like the drop-in, but they're already doing the drop-in, that risk of drop-in happens with the existing commercial kitchens and restaurants. Yeah. Like that is how they keep those regulated. So I just think it's really hard for the health department to come up with a whole new program in which to implement, because they are already short staffed, but there's just so many more variables. Part of the purpose of a commercial kitchen is to reduce the amount of variables so that you're reducing risk. That's what it's all about. It's like you're reducing who gets to come in and out of the kitchen for security reasons. If you open it up to a home, who's in the home? Who's coming by during production? What animals are in the home? What children are in the home? Like there's just so many more variables. And I'm not trying to displace like the movement or the purpose or the value of doing this. I just want us to be eyes wide open about what we're really doing and saying. And also from a consumer's perspective, that they have clarity, because part of what our food system has done is built trust through our regulatory systems. And when people get food delivered to their home through Uber Eats, they have a blind faith and a blind trust that that was produced in a licensed commercial space that is regulated. They believe that and they trust that blindly. But if we were to open up and all of a sudden these platforms can do it and can delivery and all these things, all of a sudden it's like the consumer is not having full visibility into what's happening. And I think that, then we're talking about a whole new thing where we have to do public service announcements to explain to consumers and educate the consumer. And then, what are we piling more money into doing that? So I just think that there are things that we need to think through before just saying this is a good idea.
How is this different from, and this is a general question I was thinking about, because I was thinking about Saturday markets, right? We have a great Saturday market in our hometown. I go down there, sometimes I'll buy hot food from someone. Yeah. And whether I don't think they necessarily cooked it all there. A lot of times I think like the prep was done somewhere else, and it very well could have been done in their home. Is there like an inspection chain if you're selling at a Saturday market in Washington State or in Texas, where they know that's been done in a professional kitchen?
Yeah, if they are serving food at a farmer's market, they're licensed, they have a food handler card, and they have a commissary agreement through one of these, usually a commissary kitchen, so through one of our clients. And so there is a legal framework and a process that they have to follow. Are there folks that have those permits that still produce food at home and have a license and have a commissary agreement, but are still producing food at home? Absolutely. But a lot of the shared kitchen operators will, if they don't see, they're required by a lot of the health departments to report the time that has been booked in these spaces. And so there are checks and balances between the health department and these kitchens saying, yes, they were here. Yes, they are producing in my space. And then that owner and operator of the kitchen's taking on the responsibility of that vendor. If they get a commissary agreement and that vendor never shows up, but yet they know they're at the farmer's market, they're likely to tell the health department, hey, they're not using my space. I don't know what space they are using, but they're not using my space. So at least there is a check and balance for those folks.
You talked about how when people buy food on an Uber Eats, there's an expectation that they're getting it from a professional kitchen. I know in the past, you and I have talked a lot about ghost kitchens. And I remember Reef, for example, they were trying to do this venture-funded ghost kitchen startup, and they had a bunch of essentially little trailers that are putting in parking lots that are creating food. Yeah. It's like
one of my employees ran some of those trailers in Denver.
Well, I would drive by and see these little trailers on Aurora in Seattle, which is this pretty sketchy neighborhood. And it never looked like anyone was ever working in the Reef trailer, but it seems like a lot of the blind faith we have in who's creating our food. We can question a lot of it, I feel like, when you go back to some of these past models.
Yeah, I agree. I was actually at the Apple store this past weekend, and the girl I was working with, she's like, I was telling her what I did, and she was like, oh, interesting kitchens. She's like, I used to deliver for Uber Eats. And she goes, and a lot of the times I would just be picking up food from people's houses. And she's like, that's not illegal? And I was like, no, that's not. I was like, that's not legal at all. And I was like, did you think that was strange? And she's like, yeah, but I just thought it was like fine. And I was like, oh my gosh.
I feel like some people would just say the marketplace will decide, right? And we're used to eating food at like at picnics or people bring it to, they bring it to the Sunday barbecue and we know it's made in a home. So there is some people who just will eat food where if it's made in homes. So if there's the assumption on the part of the consumer that it's made in homes, do you think it's okay? Or do you think we need to, the state or the regulatory layer needs to step in and say, hey, we need to protect you from your laissez-faire belief that like someone could just cook in their kitchen?
Well, I think it's a little different when you're choosing to go to an event and like you're not paying for the food. For sure. And you're just going to someone's house to eat or whatever.
I
but
get
when you commercialize it, I think that's when it changes. It's like the whole nature of the home cook thing is like, oh, I should be able to eat food from my neighbor. Well, no one's saying that you can't eat food from your neighbor. Like you can eat food from your neighbor. When you commercialize it, then you're kind of entering into a different relationship. And that's if you're saying that's a business, then there does need to be some sort of consumer protections for the consumer. And so I think that's where the difference comes.
That makes a lot of sense. I did like when I ordered from Josephine. I remember, and I've talked about this before, I've got some great food. I got like this great peach cobbler. And so I thought, hey, there's this great home cook who made food in my little area, and I picked it up and this marketplace connected me. So I found the experience like pretty interesting and I enjoyed it. Yeah. I would do it again in a time when people are trying to make money or maybe want to have lower food costs. I still think this is an idea worth exploring, but there still needs to be a lot of things worked out, I feel like.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Well, this has been a lot of fun. I always enjoy talking to you, Ashley.
Yeah, it has been really fun.
We will link to both of your essays because I think they both have a lot of great points, and we'll let people find and read those for themselves.
Michael, well, thanks for inviting me. It's been great chatting with you, and have me back anytime. I'll be eager to share my academic or any other opinions that I might have.
And people could find your blogs, but also your company at foodcorridor.com.
Thefoodcorridor.com. And then if you're looking for a commercial kitchen space in your area, you can go to thekitchendoor.com. You can either post a space or find a space there. So
awesome. Thanks, Ashley.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that was it. That's my conversation with Ashley Colpaart. I always enjoy catching up with Ashley. It was a lot to say about the world of shared kitchens and home kitchen marketplaces. We'll be back with the podcast next week, so stay tuned for that, and we'll talk to y'all soon.
If you enjoyed this episode, why not share it with a friend? And don't forget to give us a 5-star review. You'll find more content like this on thespoon.tech/podcasts.